Europe is standing on the edge of a storm it cannot control. China has just sanctioned 2 European banks. At first glance, it looks trivial, small players, little-known names. But don't be fooled. This is a warning shot. Beijing is showing that if Europe keeps following Washington's lead, far larger institutions could be next. And the timing could not be worse. Donald Trump is preparing the most explosive economic move yet, a 300% tariff on chips, the backbone of modern life. From cars and smartphones to defense systems and artificial intelligence, every corner of Europe's economy depends on them. If this trade war explodes, Europe won't just be collateral damage. It could be the battlefield. Subscribe now, because in this video, we're breaking down the clash between Washington, Beijing, and Brussels, and why the EU may be walking straight into an economic disaster of its own making. Trump's threat. That shook the world just a few weeks ago. Donald Trump stood before cameras and issued a threat that rattled governments across the globe. His message was blunt. If BRICS nations tried to build alternatives to the US dollar, America would hit them with tariffs, not selective penalties, but at least 10% across the board on everything. It wasn't just about trade. It was about defending the dollar's supremacy. For more than half a century, the dollar has been the anchor of global commerce. But now, BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and more than a dozen new members are building alternative systems, new banks, new trade networks, and new currencies. Trump's warning was clear. Challenge the dollar, and America will make you pay. And this is where Europe made its first mistake. Instead of pausing to weigh its own interests, Brussels rushed. To prove its loyalty to Washington. Europe sanctions 2 rural Chinese banks. In early August, the European Union unveiled its 18th sanctions package since the war in Ukraine began. Buried inside was a move few paid attention to at first: sanctions on 2 obscure Chinese lenders, Safan Rural Commercial Bank and Hunchon Rural Commercial Bank. These banks aren't giants. They're small players along the China-Russia border, mostly financing cross-border trade, local businesses, and even some crypto transactions. They don't operate in Europe, don't fund European companies, and have no footprint in Brussels' financial system. So what did the EU achieve by sanctioning them? Practically nothing. The decision brought no strategic advantage. What it did accomplish was provoking Beijing, and the warnings had been crystal clear. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi told European diplomats repeatedly, "If you sanction our banks, there will be consequences." Those warnings were ignored, and the response was immediate. China strikes back. Lithuania targeted. On August 13th, Beijing announced sanctions against 2 Lithuanian banks, UAB Bankas and AB Mano Bankas. Just like the Chinese lenders targeted by Europe, these were not major players, but the choice was deliberate. Lithuania has been locked in a bitter dispute with China since 2021, when Vilnius allowed Taiwan to open a Taiwanese representative office. That move enraged Beijing, triggering a diplomatic downgrade, blocked exports, and years of frozen relations. By striking Lithuanian banks, China sent a clear signal: Europe's sanctions will not go unanswered. And if the EU escalates, Beijing has the leverage to make the pain far greater. Europe's dangerous dependence on China here is the uncomfortable truth. Europe has far more to lose in this confrontation than China. In 2024, EU-China trade reached nearly 800 billion euros. For Germany, China is the largest auto market. Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes sell more cars in China than in Europe itself. French luxury giants like LVMH and Hermes depend heavily on Chinese consumers for champagne, handbags, and high fashion. Italian machine builders and Spanish agricultural exporters rely on Chinese demand to keep their industries alive. And on the import side, Europe is even more exposed. Solar panels, EV batteries, pharmaceuticals, and rare earths all flow from China. Without them, the EU's green transition, its push toward renewable energy and electric mobility, would grind to a halt. So why jeopardize this relationship over two tiny rural banks that don't even operate in Europe? The answer lies in Washington. Washington's grip on Brussels Europe is following America's lead, even when U.S. policies target Europe directly. Trump has repeatedly accused the EU of cheating America, threatening tariffs on European cars, steel, and other goods. Yet Brussels still aligns itself with Washington, even when it means harming its own industries. This leaves the EU trapped in a lose-lose position, angering China to please Washington, while Washington simultaneously prepares economic weapons that could hit Europe itself. And this is not just about China. Trump's threats extend to the entire BRICS bloc, which now includes more than 20 nations, among them Brazil, India, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. These are countries Europe desperately needs as trading partners, especially as ties with Russia collapse. Yet instead of building bridges, Brussels is burning them under Washington's pressure. Italy's Pirelli problem. When tires become national security, Italy shows just how deep U.S. interference runs. Tate Pirelli, the iconic Italian tire manufacturer. A Chinese state-owned firm, Kong China, owns 37% of Pirelli. That stake should mean greater access to China's auto market. Instead, Washington stepped in. The Trump administration blocked Pirelli from selling tires to Formula One in the U.S. on the grounds of national security. Yes, tires were labeled a security threat. The absurdity reveals the deeper truth. Washington is deciding which European companies succeed and which ones are held back. Italy, like the rest of Europe, is forced to shrink its own opportunities, not because it makes economic sense, but because it fears U.S. retaliation. Russia still standing, Europe struggling meanwhile, the original target of these sanctions. Russia has adapted. 19 rounds of EU sanctions later, Moscow is still standing. It has rerouted oil and gas sales to India and China in local currencies. Agricultural exports, fertilizers, and arms sales are flowing to Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Trade with China hit record levels in 2024, giving Moscow the financial cushion to weather Western pressure. Europe, by contrast, is bleeding. Cutting itself off from Russian energy has left European industries with sky-high costs, often 2 to 3 times higher than their Asian competitors. German factories are relocating production abroad. Car exports to China have collapsed. The EU's competitiveness is eroding fast, and yet Brussels continues to double down on Washington's strategy, even as the numbers prove it isn't working. The coming semiconductor shock. If Europe thought the banking spat was dangerous, the real nightmare lies ahead. Leaks from Washington suggest Trump is preparing a 300% tariff on semiconductors, the lifeblood of the modern economy. The goal is clear. Force Asian giants like TSMC, Samsung, and Tokyo Electron to relocate production to the U.S., but the consequences would be catastrophic. If they comply, production costs will explode. U.S. labor and infrastructure are far more expensive than Asia. Those costs will ripple across every sector, from electric cars to fighter jets. If they refuse, U.S. consumers will face surging chip prices. Smartphones, laptops, medical devices, AI systems, everything will become dramatically more expensive. For Europe, the fallout could be devastating. EU companies are deeply dependent on Asia's chip ecosystem. Tariff-driven price shocks could paralyze its auto industry, aviation sector, and even defense systems. Add in Beijing's potential retaliation, restricting rare earth exports, or closing its auto market, and Europe could face a supply chain collapse unlike anything in modern history. Europe's strategic failure, the irony is staggering. Europe could have positioned itself as a bridge between Washington and Beijing, playing a balancing role while protecting its industries. Instead, it has tied itself to Washington's agenda at the very moment America's global leverage is slipping. BRICS is accelerating its move away from the dollar. Cross-border settlements in local currencies are rising. Payment systems are being built outside U.S. control. Every threat from Washington only pushes BRICS nations closer together. And now Europe has stepped into the storm, not to defend its own interests, but to defend a dollar system that benefits Washington far more than Brussels. The weakest hand at the table, Europe, is walking into one of the most dangerous moments in its modern history. China has shown it is willing to retaliate. Washington is pushing a global tariff war that could devastate supply chains. Russia, the supposed target of sanctions, has adapted and survived. And BRICS is building the foundations of a world where the dollar, and by extension America's leverage, is weaker than ever. Yet, Brussels continues to sacrifice its industries, its jobs, and its long-term competitiveness to follow Washington's lead. The question now is stark. Will Europe wake up and defend its own interests, or will it keep walking down a path that leads to economic self-destruction? This standoff is only the beginning. Trump's tariff war is about to escalate into chips, the most critical resource of the digital age. And Europe may soon find itself dragged into a confrontation it cannot win. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in this unfolding crisis.